The Jets kick off their preseason this weekend against the Washington Commanders, and this exhibition game means more for some members of the team than others. Let's discuss today on Locked On Jets.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It is Thursday, August 8th, 2024, and I'm your host, John B. from GangGreenNation.com. Thank you so much for making the show your first listen or first watch every day. Subscribe to the show for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you'll get new episodes as soon as they're posted. If you enjoy the show and are listening on the podcast source, please give it a 5-star review. If you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. It helps us out and helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Well, we're going to talk about the Jets preseason opener today. Saturday, the Jets open their exhibition season, their 3-game exhibition season against the Washington Commanders. Kickoff time is noon Eastern. The game will be broadcast locally on WCBS2 in New York. There's some other ways you can watch the game. In fact, if you're living in the United Kingdom or Ireland, you can actually stream the game on NewYorkJets.com, the team's official website. I think that has something to do with like partnerships the league has, giving teams access to certain markets in Europe. And things get underway today, actually, as the Jets and Commanders have joint practices. They'll do one today and one tomorrow, joint training camp practices at the Jets team facility to prepare for the game. Now, I think the way you should watch preseason games is a little bit different than the way you watch regular season games. In regular season, it's all about whether the team wins or loses. Preseason is more about the individual performances. I mean, yeah, I guess I'd rather the Jets win than see the Jets lose. But really, I want to see certain players do well in the preseason. And these are guys who typically have made some sort of impression in training camp, whether good, whether bad, whether we're trying to figure out based on what we've seen so far. And these are the guys I'd like to talk about on today's show. Now, I don't get the sense the Jets starters are going to play all that much. So a guy I'm really interested in is Joe Tippmann, but I'm not sure whether he's going to take the field. And if he does, I'm not sure how long he'll play. There have been reports that he and Aaron Rodgers have maybe not been on the same page. That Tippmann's been having some trouble executing snaps, but I don't know that we're going to see Tippmann all that much. And even if we do, it doesn't sound like we're going to see Rodgers at all in this game. So, Tippmann's kind of a guy who's on the back burner, even though he is an interesting player. A guy I would expect us to see in this game is Will McDonald. And Will McDonald has kind of been a flashpoint since he was drafted. Of course, going back to 2023, it was a very, very surprising pick when the Jets selected him 15th overall in the first round. Nobody was really expecting Will McDonald. In fact, we did not talk once about Will McDonald in the lead up to the 2023 draft. And lest I feel bad about this, I actually did a search a few months back on Twitter, before the draft. I could not find any Jets reporter mention Will McDonald as a possible Jets pick back in 2023. Of course, this year, things are a little bit different. Jets have reshaped their defensive end room, and one of the guys who's a key part of that room, Hassan Reddick, is not here, which means there are snaps that have opened up for Will McDonald. And even if and when Reddick returns, there's still going to be plenty of snaps for McDonald because the Jets, the way they run their defense, the way they allocate snaps, Robert Saleh likes to rotate guys in and out. I like to think that the Jets have 3 starting defensive ends. Essentially, if you're the number 3 defensive end, you're going to get a starter share of the snaps, or if not, you're going to get an appreciable share of the snaps. And the reports out of training camp with McDonald have been kind of mixed. Now, this week, there have been reports that he has put together a couple of good practices, which is a positive, but there were also reports before then that, maybe Michael Clemens was seeing some snaps over him. And it's really difficult to read into what any of this means because there could be all sorts of different motivations behind what the coaching staff's doing. Sometimes the coaching staff likes to get a look at how a certain player does against better competition. Sometimes the coaching staff's trying to light a fire under a guy by either giving him starter snaps or by putting him on the second units. Sometimes you're trying to build confidence in the guy. You put him against second teamers because you think he'll have success. In any event, I think it's fair to say, based on what we've heard, that McDonald's training camp to this point has been a bit uneven. And McDonald entered the league a bit of a project. And it's not just that he was a project. It's a project who was already, 24 years old when he was drafted. And of course, being an older prospect doesn't necessarily mean you're doomed to failure. but it does mean that you're closer to your physical peak. A guy you draft who's 21, who's a project, he's got plenty of time to develop. And you feel like part of the reason he's a project that he's still ascending. He's still got time to build athleticism, till time to reach his physical peak. McDonald's near his physical peak right now. He's entering this year. He's only about a year younger than Bryce Huff, who played for the Jets for 4 years. And when the Jets drafted McDonald, I think the view was always that year one would not produce a whole lot. First of all, because the Jets had a very strong defensive end room a year ago, so a rookie could kind of come along at his own pace. But also McDonald, I think the view was, he needed to bulk up a little bit. He needed to hit the weight room, and he needed to learn how to play the defensive end position. In college, you can win based on your athletic ability. The talent gap can be so great in college that if you're just physically better than somebody, you can dominate. In the NFL, it doesn't work that way. In the NFL, everybody's a great athlete, so you have to win on technique. You can't out-athlete people in the NFL. And that's true. It's not just true of McDonald. It's true of a lot of players in this league. It's true of pretty much everybody who enters the NFL, that they have to learn technique. They have to learn how to play their position. And the Jets coaching staff, over the last 3-4 years, there have been issues with this coaching staff. But one of the things they have done very well is help defensive linemen improve their games. So this is going to be interesting. This should be our first look at how McDonald is doing. And as I always say, I like to view these player performances when we're talking about what happens before the season as kind of like part of a long story arc. I think that you're doing yourself a disservice if you go too crazy, like trying to fixate on the day-to-day. You have to look for longer term trends. And that's true when we're talking about the off-season program. That's true when we're talking about training camp. And it's also true when we're talking about the exhibition games. But I think of the three, the exhibition games are the most significant because they provide you with the closest you can get to an actual game simulation, because it is a game. Maybe you don't have the intensity. Maybe there's not the pressure of the regular season where you're trying to win games. Of course, in exhibition season, the starters, again, don't play that much, if at all. So you're not going against the premium talent, but it's an opportunity. And I think that if McDonald goes out and plays well, it kind of changes the narrative around him. And, again, we're kind of building up this weekend. Again, you don't want, with the caveat, as I mentioned, you don't want to read too much, just as you don't want to read too much into one practice. You don't want to read too much into one game. It's part of a longer story. I think the story around McDonald is a bit mixed right now. And a good performance, if he shows signs of beating pass protectors, getting to the quarterback, I think that's a positive sign. I think we can start to change the narrative on that. I think, if he starts to display, and this is one of the things we don't get to see in reading the reports in training camp, how developed are his moves? Has he developed good counters? One of the things that's tough when you enter the NFL, as I mentioned, you can't out-athlete people anymore. So a lot of guys enter the NFL from college as pass rushers. They have one really good move, one really good pass rush move. But in the NFL, you're going up against tackles who know how to neutralize that. So you have to figure out a second move. Then you have to figure out a second move within a play, because once your first move's neutralized, you have to figure out what your plan B is. And that's something a lot of guys struggle with. So that'll be something worth watching with McDonald. What's his plan B? How many moves can he display? How much variety does he have? There are moments where you saw the makings of a nice swim move. There have been points where you've seen a nice rip. There's even kind of the outer workings of a spin move he's developing. Be interesting to see what McDonald can bring to the table. Now, here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll keep our attention on the defensive side of the ball. While the story has been up and down on McDonald, there's been a player who's kind of been turning heads in training camp on the second level of the defense. What can this guy bring? We'll talk about that, and we'll talk about who it is, continuing here on this Thursday edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by LinkedIn. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. And that's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. The Jets have a scouting department. They have a front office. That's kind of their version of LinkedIn Jobs. But I bet your business doesn't have that. And that's where LinkedIn comes in, because LinkedIn is not just a jobs board. It helps you hire professionals you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job, but might be open to the perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. And on LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. Hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. And LinkedIn knows that small businesses are wearing so many hats and may not have the time or resources to hire. And LinkedIn is constantly finding new ways to make the process easier. They even just launched a feature that helps you write job descriptions, making the process even easier and quicker. 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn for hiring. Put your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. So much for making Locked On Jets your first listener, first watch every day. And a big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets. We have new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. We are getting ready for the first game of the preseason in 2024. It will be the New York Jets versus the Washington Commanders, noon Eastern time on Saturday. WCBS2 will have the action. Our good friend Ian Eagle will be on the call along with Anthony Becht. First look for most fans at the Jets in 2024, although we probably won't see many of the starters. And if we do see them, we won't see them for very long. Now, there's been a guy who's a fourth-year player who, by all accounts, has really been impressive in training camp. But this will be our first chance to watch him in a game situation, and that's Jamien Sherwood, who last year, after the departure of Quan Alexander, Sherwood stepped into the third linebacker role. I guess he kind of shared it with Ashton Davis. I guess it depended on what matchup the Jets like, because there were some games where Sherwood played a lot. There were other games where Davis played a lot, even though I know Davis is technically a safety. Like the two of them played a role that I thought was kind of similar a year ago. But this year, Sherwood's been one of the talks of training camp. And, last year, I remember I felt that there was too much apprehension over the loss of Quan Alexander. In fact, I remember in 2022, I thought there was too much excitement over the signing of Quan Alexander. And that's not to say that Quan Alexander is a bad player. I thought he was a good signing in 2022, and I would have liked to have seen him back in 2023. But I think things get, there's a balance to it. I thought things got a little out of control talking about a third linebacker. Now, for Sherwood, his role is pretty clear right now. He is the third linebacker, and in the past he's been C.J. Mosley's backup. Back in his rookie season, he actually played the Mosley role in a game Mosley missed against New England, which was a disaster performance for the New York Jets. So Sherwood's got a couple of things on his plate, and when the Jets drafted him out of Auburn back in 2021, he was a safety in college, and they decided to convert him to linebacker. And the amount of grief the Jets got for that was kind of striking to me. And I didn't really understand why people were so critical of this decision, because first of all, it's not like it's unusual for a team to draft a safety and move him to linebacker. That's happened a lot in the NFL. In fact, a former Jets player, Bart Scott, he was a guy who played safety, and Baltimore got him and converted him to linebacker. Essentially, sometimes some guys aren't fast enough to play safety, but they're fast enough to play linebacker. Linebackers don't need to be as fast as safety. So if you're a good tackler, if you're a good guy in the box, that's a move you make. But second, it's also kind of the direction the league's going. League's spreading out on offense. You're seeing more passing game emphasized. You're seeing teams use more spread formations. So you want somebody who's faster. You want somebody who's quicker. And generally speaking, safeties cover better than linebackers. They're not just faster; they cover better than linebackers. So you're I think that we get too fixated on these rigid position designations, because in many ways, what a box safety does has like 90 to 95% overlap with what a linebacker does. Now, deep safety is a little bit different, but if you're drafting somebody just to be a box safety, you're having them play the same role an awful lot. And, if you look at some of the teams the Jets are going to have to go through this year, particularly Baltimore, Baltimore uses a lot of heavy formations. We're talking about the competition in the AFC. Kansas City spreads it out a lot, but one of their go-to guys is Travis Kelce. So your third linebacker is going to actually be, he's not going to be an every down player. He's not going to be a guy who's critical every week, but there are certain games where your third linebacker will play a key role. And I think with the Jets, the decision to draft Sherwood kind of goes back to the idea that they wanted to, for all intents and purposes, play what's known as big nickel. And big nickel is when you have 5 defensive backs on the field. And normally when you're in the nickel, and that's kind of like the base formation now, it's kind of the base personnel grouping for defenses across the league. But normally when you're in nickel with 5 defensive backs, it's 3 corners, 2 safeties. Big nickel is 3 safeties, 2 corners. Safeties are usually bigger than corners, so that's why they call it big nickel. And you're kind of trying to get the best of all worlds, because when you go nickel, that usually means it's a linebacker who comes off the field. And if you're replacing a linebacker with a corner, that kind of leaves you more susceptible to playing, to giving up big things against the run, because corners don't play the run as well as linebackers. If you put the linebacker on the field, though, you're susceptible to the pass because linebackers don't cover as well as corners. So when you put a safety on the field, I think the theory behind it is that safeties cover better than linebackers, but they're better against the run the corner. So you're kind of trying to find the middle ground there. And I think that, even though Sherwood is technically listed as a linebacker, that's the idea behind drafting him that's kind of the idea behind drafting him and converting him, is that you think you're getting a safety skill set who can kind of play that role that's kind of like part corner, part linebacker. I think it's also worth watching for Sherwood's future because he's in the final year of his contract. So there's the question, how well can he play this third linebacker role? Yeah, it's not a role that's going to be critical every week, but you play against Baltimore, could be critical. You play against teams with good tight ends. Week 1 against San Francisco, another team that uses a lot of heavy formation. We could see Sherwood a lot in that game. Even Kansas City, there will be going to be moments where when the Chiefs go double tight end, where you'll have to put an extra linebacker on the field. These are some of the key opponents the Jets will face through the course of the season. So you want to see how good the Jets will be in those situations, but you also want to take a look. I mean, all the buzz around Sherwood in training camp. Not every piece of buzz ends up panning out. There are lots of guys who get hyped through training camp and end up not really amounting to much. But Sherwood in the final year of his contract, I think you also have to think of the future because CJ Mosley's in his 30s, and I think you have to figure out how far is Sherwood taking this. Is he just going to be a role player? Now, if he's just a role player, I still think that's a pretty good thing for the Jets because I think if you get a quality depth linebacker out of a late round pick, I mean that's a win because most late round picks don't give you anything. Most late round picks aren't quality depth players, so you're still beating the spread. But how good could Sherwood be? Could Sherwood potentially be a replacement for CJ Mosley? And I'm getting way ahead of myself even suggesting that because I'm not even in the ballpark where I believe that's a legitimate possibility. But it's worth watching, and this game will not determine whether or not Sherwood replaces CJ Mosley, but it's an early opportunity to look and see. Again, talking about viewing the training camp and the preseason games is kind of like a long story. It'll be our first look to see how legitimate this talk about Sherwood improving is. And if it puts together a good game, then that's a positive, and we can continue to look forward and see how he plays the rest of the exhibition season. If he doesn't play so well, then maybe that's a sign that all the early hype in training camp is dying down. It'll be interesting to see. Another thing it'll be interesting to see, Jets rookies. As we continue here on this Thursday edition of Locked On Jets, we get our first opportunity to take a look at the rookie class. A couple guys worth watching in the rookie class, and we'll talk about who they are, what to look for as we continue here on this Thursday edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by Gametime. Gametime is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on the Gametime app actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch. And with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices used from your seat and their lowest price guarantee, Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying Major League Baseball tickets. But it's not just Major League Baseball tickets they sell. They also sell NFL tickets. So maybe you're interested in heading out to MetLife Stadium this weekend, looking for a discounted ticket. Nobody wants to pay full price for preseason football. Well, Gametime's the place to go because Gametime has great deals on great seats. And you can find something amazing on Gametime close to the start of your event. And it's not just sports. I mean, there's music, comedy, theater, you name it, Gametime's got it. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account at redeem code LOCKEDONNFL, LOCKEDONNFL, one word with no space for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. This is the Locked On Jets podcast on this Thursday. We're getting ready for Saturday's preseason opener between the New York Jets and the Washington Commanders. Jets kicking off their first of 3 preseason games, and there are some interesting players to watch in this game. And I think we have to end by talking about this rookie class because the rookies are going to take the field. And I think every single rookie is interesting to a degree, but I think particularly the early round picks, the first couple of guys the Jets drafted, because these are the guys who stand the best chance of playing a role for this team in 2024. So obviously Olu Fashanu is up near the top of that list because we want to see how he does at the left tackle position. This is I think Olu Fashanu should play a lot in these games. I'm not sure that they'll do it because he's still an important player for the Jets this year, even though he's not a starter. He's the third tackle, but I'd love to see Olu Fashanu get some reps. In part just because I think reps are going to be helpful. In part because at least at the beginning of the season. As long as everybody's healthy, he's going to be on the bench. And the Jets will need him at some point with two 33-year-old tackles. At some point, they're going to need their Olu Fashanu to step in. So I'd like to get him as many reps in preseason as possible. But also, because he's going to be going up against backups and third stringers, I like the idea of like building a young guy's confidence, because you're putting him in a position to succeed. You're putting him in a position where he's probably going to play really well because he's going to be more talented than the guys he's facing. And I like the idea of giving him an opportunity to go out there and dominate. And, you kind of build confidence. And you also like, well, you'll hear like the reporters after the game, no, wow, he didn't give up anything. So I like that idea. Malachi Corley, not entirely sure what role he's going to have on the Jets this year. Now they'll carve out some touches for him on offense, but as we've been discussing since the Jets drafted him, the big question with Corley is how quickly can he learn how to run routes? And it's not easy to do when you haven't really run routes in college. It's even tougher when you're in the slot, because in the slot, the routes require precision, especially with a quarterback like Aaron Rodgers. It'll be our first look at Corley. It'll also be interesting to see how his game translates to the NFL, because in college, he ran over guys. He was just bigger and stronger than them. It'll be interesting to see how well he breaks tackles in the NFL, even against backups and third stringers. Backups and third stringers are more talented than the guys who aren't going to make teams the guys who aren't going to make 53-man rosters. There's still like college all-stars. So it'll be interesting to see how Corley's game translates from that standpoint, because that'll be the one thing that I can guarantee you the Jets will do. They will definitely manufacture touches for him. They'll try and get him the ball in space. They'll try and get him a chance to get ahead of steam and break tackles. Beyond that, though, I think the question is how quickly and how much can his route running come along, because that'll determine how many slot snaps he gets out of the slot this year. And the third guy I've got my eye on is another guy who's turning heads in training camp, Braylon Allen, who, when the Jets drafted him out of Wisconsin, I have to be honest with you, I wasn't super excited about him because I watched some of the film. It didn't look that great, and the numbers were good, but it wasn't like great. Like good college numbers don't really translate to the NFL. It didn't seem like there was any wow factor to his game, and he was a guy who had questions about his athletic skills, and he kind of skipped the athletic testing. And then I did more research on him, and the more research I did on him, the more intrigued I became by him, because it's a guy who was in the early stages of his career, he was dominant at Wisconsin, and then was good but not as dominant after that. And I think there are some potential reasons for that we can discuss. But there's some talent. I think that when he at 17 years old, at a point where he should have been a high school senior, he was averaging close to 7 yards per carry in the Big Ten. That shows that there's some hidden talent in there somewhere. And I think that maybe it was a case he got some bad advice on his running style. I think maybe he bulked up a little bit too much because somebody told him, you got to be a power back, and maybe that robbed him of some of his explosiveness. I think the reasons like his production fell off are kind of complicated, but I do think there's some talent lurking there. And if the other thing that stuck out to me is, even though he wasn't like used a ton in the passing game at Wisconsin, he's got good hands. I mean, he can adjust. It's not just he can secure the catch. And that running back, as much as we talk about the great receiving running backs, aside from like the McCaffreys of the world or the Camaras, the great receiving running backs just secure the catch. And it's really they catch a screen. And then once they catch the screen, it's pretty much like a handoff where they're able to make it happen. Braylon Allen's got good hands. It's not just he can secure the catch. He can adjust to poorly thrown balls. So this is a guy who I think can be a weapon in the passing game. So I'm really intrigued by what Braylon Allen can bring to the table. And I'm excited to see what he can do this coming weekend. It'll be our first opportunity to see him in the NFL. Again, he's a guy who the more I've learned about him, the more I've studied, the more excited I've gotten. And by all accounts, he's really, really impressing the Jets. And, the Jets already have a great number one back in Breece Hall. I mean, this has the chance. Last year we were hoping a lot, big things from Dalvin Cook that never panned out. And I remember I said that the Jets had one of the best 1-2 punches at running back in the league last year. And it turned out they had one of the best 1-1 punches in the league, because Breece Hall was really good. Cook was, a nothing. But this year they're going a little bit younger at the running back position. They drafted two guys. They also drafted Isaiah Davis. Allen, again, is a very intriguing player, and this will be our first opportunity to see him in an actual game situation for the Jets. And I'm excited to see what he can do. But that's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoy the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so it's never miss an episode. If you enjoy the show and are listening on the podcast source, please give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. It helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Enjoy your Thursday, everybody. We'll be back tomorrow to close out the week.